really we want to roll into as well. So the month of April is actually World Landscape Architecture Month. And so if you're aware of what this is, you may or may not be, but it was actually established by the American Society of Landscape Architects. And surprisingly enough, it's a month-long international celebration of landscape architecture and design, public and private spaces. So people and communities around the world have deep, long-standing personal connections to the spaces landscape architects create. They're just not always aware of it. So when they're in a spot, they might feel calm or happy or excited or comfortable or safe. But they don't realize that they feel that way because there was a lot of design and thought that went behind that by a landscape architect. So during this month, ASLA and landscape architects around the world are aiming to demonstrate that connection by essentially highlighting landscape architect design spaces. And this year's theme, there's a theme every year, it's actually growing together. So we thought, what better way to grow together than to launch Parking Day, let it be an event that's available not just to landscape architects, but that actually pulls in the community all around us, where we can grow together and kind of bring awareness to ASLA. And another event we want to go over is Sustainable Building Week in San Diego. So Parking Day that we're going over today was actually featured on the website. So you can find us there. And essentially what Sustainable Building Week is, it's a again, week-long highlight or week-long event that highlights local organizations going above and beyond in sustainability and improving our built environment. The inaugural Sustainable Building Week San Diego will address a wide range of topics, including building decarbonization and climate policy in San Diego, potable water reuse, access to green space and parks, veterans, workspace development, and more. So these two events will essentially, we're kind of rolling this larger, or we're rolling our Parking Day into these larger events that are going on in April. But ultimately, this webinar today is being presented to you by ASLA, the San Diego chapter. So without further ado, I want to turn this over to Chris Stebbins, our 2021 ASLA San Diego chapter president.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Much appreciated.
Yeah, of course.
Something I wanted to point out really quick is that we will stay in touch with any and all organizations that really want to engage in this event. And so you will have a connection to us, and later on in the year, we will promote all these organizations as part of a unified effort countywide, and you'll be able to see where the other parklets are happening all over the county. So that's the intention here, and we will be here as a connection to you all. So why Parking Day, and what's the point? So the mission of Parking Day is to highlight how much urban public space is actually dedicated to a single private use of parking an automobile or two, and how much the space could, be for people and improve the quality of the human habitat. And so that's kind of become more important as we've experienced over the course of this last year, where we've seen public life actually extend out into the street, and parking spaces have been used for private dining. And this seems like a really opportune time to build on that opportunity to extend the public realm. A little bit of history of Parking Day, where it began and how it began. It began as a rogue endeavor. So the original idea this was in 2005, back in San Francisco. This organization called Rebar had this idea of converting a parking space. What you're looking at is the very first one ever done in 2005. And the idea back then was to keep a quarter coin into the meter and keep it going all day long as this parklet is alive. But it had a really good idea back then, is to build this thing back away and see what happens. And it turns out, these people are not staged, they are hanging out. So it's very spontaneously and very organically people hung out there. Over time, it evolved into an international movement. Well, nationwide, of course, and now international as well. So we are part of a global event in September. And so it's much bigger than just our city and our country. Typically held on the third Friday of September of every year. And this year is September 17th to 2021. So if you want to, plan ahead, put this in your calendars now, because that is the day, and it's an all-day event from morning until usually the late afternoon, early evening. So what do these look like? They could look like any one of these examples. They can be something beautiful, they could be something functional, they could be something playful, they could be something colorful. It could be include a lot of plant material, or it could include very little. But so the range is pretty much as wide as your imagination. There is no limitation to what kind of little parklet you can install. And in some cases, they're more than just a single parklet. In the example I'm going to show you a little bit later, we are actually using three adjacent parklets next to each other. So yeah, it can be everything. And we're hoping to get the full range of parklets this September. It is a form of what's called tactical urbanism. So what that basically means is it's a short-term, low-cost, and scalable intervention to catalyze long-term change. It can relate to public space, like in the case of this parking day event, street safety, and actually transportation projects. It can really test the waters. It's kind of a proof of concept. Warms the public, municipalities, and local businesses to that idea. So it's really kind of a low-cost way to test an idea and see how people react to it. Here's some more examples. This is a rather large one. It can be of all scales of these kind of treatments. They can be small, like a parklet that is replacing an individual parking space. Or in the case of this project that I worked in New Zealand, it takes up an entire large public space at the center of the city, as well as the streets that were extending from that large public space. But it basically shut down all the cars for, in this case, it was 10 days. So, this is an example of a large scale version, and, kind of an extreme version, actually. So, this proof of concept could be pretty powerful, and it could be any kind of scale. It's the limitation is not scale; it's more of the idea that you're trying to present here. So, we assume here that you're here because you want to make a parklet. So let's go through a lot of information here, and hopefully you won't be overwhelmed. But just it's meant to be fun, and it's meant to test an idea. Before we give you kind of the description of how we would go about it and what we're recommending for, like, all the steps and all the legal steps and the creative steps to create this parklet, highly recommend looking at the original manual that was written by Rebar, that same organization that started the original 2005 event. Just go to Google and type in Parking Day Manual. It's easier to do that than give you the whole URL here. And it gives you kind of a full manual of how to run one in your own location. But this is a little bit dated, so we're gonna give you a little bit more maybe up-to-date information as it relates to San Diego, to municipalities in San Diego County. So before we begin, a couple of key things to consider before you commit to making a parklet. First of all, highly recommend having someone in your organization or firm that really feels passionate about this. They want to see it through, and they could be the face and the first point of contact with doing this. And they will be the person, reaching out to the municipality, whether it's permitting or parking or what have you, maybe reaching out to ways to market this. They're their first point of contact, but they're also organizing all the steps and potentially a team if you have a team of people. And we'll get into that later. So if you have one person in this organization, you're doing good if that person wants to see it through. Second, highly recommend making a decision on how substantial you want your parklet to be. I felt it was important to make this distinction. And over the next few slides, I'll explain why. So it's perfectly valid to make a small parklet or a very simple parklet. Throw some astroturf down, maybe a few potted plants, a couple chairs, you're good. And this is a perfectly valid approach, especially if you're an organization that doesn't necessarily have a design background or access to a lot of plant and hardscape materials. This is a perfectly valid approach, and it's low cost, relatively simple, and it does the trick. And so this would only take probably 1 to 3 people, maybe 1 to 2 weeks total to actually get this done. So this is one approach, and it can be pretty successful. These are simple installations here. These actually have live turf in these cases, but AstroTurf works just as well. In fact, that's the recommendation now, is to use artificial turf so it won't damage the asphalt. But anyway, yeah, perfectly valid. All these people look pretty happy, right? So that's one approach, and that's less substantial. Or alternatively, you can make something more impactful. So what you're looking at here is the installation that I did in Athens, Georgia back in 2015. And this actually used up 3.5 parking spaces linearly along the edge of a street. And it was a monumental effort. There was a lot of live plant material and hardscape material, most of it lent. Almost all this material was lent to us. Some of it borrowed. Yeah, all of it borrowed, most of it borrowed, and some of it actually donated to us. But it involved a full team that was motivated and more time, and definitely more connections and more volunteers on the actual day of installation. Here's some other examples. It doesn't have to look like something more formal like the one before it. It can be creative. It could be purely artistic. It could be anything you want it to be. But in all these cases, you can tell that this involves a fair amount of design and planning. But we are inviting organizations that don't necessarily have a design background. But if you want to go for it, we're going to help you through that process, especially with this webinar of how to run your own substantial parklet, if this is what you want to do. Here's more photos from the one in Athens. Yeah, lots of hardscape material. It ended up being gorgeous, beyond my expectations, and everybody in the city wanted to stay. Even police officers, meter people, other university, this is in Athens, Georgia, so the UGA officials, they even had a impromptu modeling shoot. We had a lot of classrooms and organizations show up at it, and they all loved it. So when you create something more substantial, it definitely brings more people and more attention to it rather than a more simple parklet. So, some of the benefits of making something more impactful is it will also highlight and market the abilities of your firm or organization. So if you're an architecture or landscape architecture firm, or even an interior design firm, and you really want to show off and potentially market your company too, this is one way to do it. And so, highly encourage you to do so. However, this typically involves, like I was saying before, months of planning, many more months of planning, a core team of people in specific roles, a design process, materials and relationship for those sources for donating or lending, staging areas to put the stuff, both before and afterwards, access to some kind of vehicles to move the stuff, and however that comes about, and then volunteers, not only on the day of installation, but on the months and weeks preceding September 17th. So in either case, we definitely recommend establishing your contacts with city officials of the host municipality early. For a more simple parklet, recommend at least 2 months in advance. That way they just know it's coming down the pike, and you know, if necessary, even the police is aware, and also the parking service is aware that it's happening, and they don't need to wonder what's going on. For a more substantial parklet, recommend 6 months in advance, and that basically means today or tomorrow, because we're about 6 months out from September 17th right now, roughly. So if you really want to make something more substantial, I would start planning right away. Identify your champion, and we're going to talk about putting together the team. Now, that being said, you can do something in between here. You can do something much more substantial or something simple, just somewhere in between. But that's just give you an idea of how much time you want to, you know, reach out to the host municipality and the amount of time you want to plan this thing. So here's our recommendations for running a successful parking day, especially in regards to a more substantial parklet. So here's a case where this is College Avenue in downtown Athens, Georgia, and this is a location that has high pedestrian traffic. Actually, let me go through each step here. So highly recommend choosing a commercial district of your neighborhood in front of street level businesses in a designated urban area, and ideally around compact mixed use development in a place where there's regular pedestrian traffic. So you definitely want this thing to be seen by as many people as possible in a place where there already may be a lot of public life, but there might not necessarily be a parklet. Now, these days, we also have outdoor dining as well. So, you know, consider maybe putting one of these immediately adjacent to existing outdoor private dining. So consider using more than one parking space, like I mentioned before. In this case, you know, there's 3 spaces back to back to back, and it made for a very interesting experience for people that were visiting. At the very least, if you don't want to necessarily use all 3 spaces for the actual installation, recommend maybe also permitting an adjacent space just to be able to unload and load materials. On the day of the one I did in Athens, organized in Athens, the parking space adjacent to ours was taken up by a vehicle that was left there the night before. So it definitely made it more challenging to unload and load. We actually had to block the lane for about an hour and a half, 2 hours in the mornings, early morning. So and in the afternoon. So it's, you know, if you can maybe consider, you know, just thinking ahead as far as like maybe give yourself more space to work with. So here is a photo of Claremont Mesa Boulevard. You know, basically your classic mid-century car boulevard, multiple lanes, high-speed traffic, no sense of walkability, community, or, you know, pedestrian circulation. So this is definitely less ideal. This is kind of an extreme example, but the point is, this is not the kind of place you want to put a parking day parklet. So here's more of a residential street. You know, with a mix of single use or single family as well as condominium or apartment complexes. This is also less ideal because it's just not going to experience a lot of informal pedestrian traffic. So this is in South Park at a intersection where there is a lot of pedestrian traffic, not necessarily on this day at this time, but if you are hanging out here in pretty much any afternoon and evening, especially on the weekends, it's definitely happening quite a bit, or even just all weekend. And there's some really great restaurants, really great cafes, and really great storefront businesses around here, which, you know, this would be a really great area. And so definitely more ideal. And this is actually the location that I'm proposing our chapter do our own parking day in one of these 2 spaces, if not both. So, yeah, and unless you guys permit it first, we'll be right after you. So we might have to find another place if you permit this first. So it's I already put it out there, so that was probably a dangerous move. But this is a good spot. But they're all over San Diego. Lots of great neighborhoods with nice urban, you know, urban commercial and residential density and lots of pedestrian traffic. You know, all kinds of places. The Village in La Mesa, I can think of, or like the Village in Carlsbad, 3rd Avenue in Chula Vista. You know, the list goes on. We got some good places to put this stuff. So I'm going to turn this over to Patricia Furman, who's going to talk to you about, making that initial contact to your host municipality where you would like to put this parklet, and whether it's 2 months out or 6 months out, depending on how substantial you want your parklet to be. Yeah, basically, this is some of the steps you might want to take.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're very excited to share information with you and, to help you out. Like Chris said, I am the principal landscape architect with the City of Chula Vista. So if you guys have questions about the City of Chula Vista, please contact me and I'll be happy to assist. But basically, what you have to do, first of all, is contact your city. They're there to help you out and to provide information. For the City of Chula Vista, you would have to contact someone in the Economic Development Department. But basically, just call your city and ask to speak with the department that handles special events. It may vary. Some of them may be in the building division, or it could be in development services. So just go ahead and contact your city. Ask to speak with the department that handles special events. And then once you find out who the special events coordinator is, then you would be able to get information from them about the event and how to go about getting the permit. They also will have a list of items that will be required for them to review, and they will give you a list of entities that will have to review the application. Remember that this is just one-day event and the permit is just for 1 day, but obviously the process varies according to cities. At the City of Chula Vista, we would try to make it as simple as possible. So like I said before, if you are interested in installing a parklet within the City of Chula Vista, please contact me first. And then I will be happy to give you information and also give you the names of the persons that you would have to talk with. As Chris mentioned before, one of the entities that may have to review your application is the Parking Services Department. With the City of Chula Vista, we would have to share that information with them for their information only. Depending on the location, they may or may not need to approve the permit. But again, it depends on the city, on your own city. Next slide, please. Another department that may have to look at the concept of your parklet is the police department. And they will review it to ensure that the parklet is safe. And you may need to show the barriers to prevent pedestrians from walking into moving traffic. And they may have to give you some feedback about the layout of your parklet. Next. I highly recommend contacting your Chamber of Commerce or the business association in your area. They may be able to facilitate the permit process, and they also will be able to communicate to the business owners of how expanding pedestrian access in front of their businesses will bring more customers. Next, please. In addition, the city may require a certificate of insurance with additional endorsement and also a waiver of liability. Like I said, the special events coordinator will be able to give you the list of items that will be required to approve the permit. And since it's only a one-day event, it should be easier than processing a permit for another type of event. Next. And like we said before, please contact the business owners in front of the parklets to make sure that they understand what's going on and also to get excited about it. They may not understand at first, or maybe they don't know about it, but once you explain it to them how this is going to benefit their business and how this may bring more customers, they may be on board. And it's always good to discuss it with them.
Great, thank you, Patricia. That's a really good point. Yeah, thank you, Patricia. That's all good stuff. And this is just kind of like the minimum of this kind of some of the steps that you want to do. And ideally, that champion, that person that is kind of like the first face of this, of your endeavor would be making those initial contacts, especially with the special events permitting. And again, just to reiterate, something, a big benefit of this is, warming local businesses up, especially the ones that are fronting these parklets, to the idea of that they could actually experience more business, more unplanned, informal business going into their doors, more so than a single parking space or two would facilitate. When people are driving around, if they don't want to pull over, they're not going to be able to find parking, they're just going to keep on going and not necessarily bother pulling over to find out about a particular business. But when you're walking around and you're wandering around, it's a really fun thing to do, to be able to step a few feet over and check out something that you haven't seen before. So once a lot of local businesses understand that, it's a wonderful thing, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this. So something that you might want to do in order, so item number 3 on this list of items that for establishing a park, and especially a more substantial one, is to identify a core team. So you're the champion. You're not going to be able to do this all by yourself, especially if you're going to make something more substantial. Something I want to point out is that some of you on this call are probably coming from design firms, and the point of this portion of the presentation is not to explain to you all how to go about a process that you're very much familiar with already. It's mainly a lot of tips for especially volunteers. This is a volunteer endeavor that might be slightly different process than your usual design build process. This is also open to other organizations that are not necessarily designers. So we're kind of going through some recommendations here that we could definitely say that will help whatever organization you are, whether you're a community organization, if you have any kind of stake in your neighborhood or in your community. These are some of the some of the steps that we highly recommend you take. So again, here we are: identify a core team. Pull them from your friends or from other people in your organization. Choose well. I have a little story that I'd love to share. How I recruited my team. I was a graduate student at the University of Georgia, very busy, and I wanted to, I was kind of tasked to start this whole parklet job situation, but I didn't want to do most of the work myself or all by myself, especially as busy as I was. So I tried something kind of tricky. I invited a lot of individual, people in my department to come and meet me for margaritas and tacos at a local Mexican food place in Athens, Georgia. But they all came individually, and I didn't tell them that they were all coming together. And then they were all there, all together on this big long table, and they were wondering why they're all there at the same time, wondering why I brought them to get there. And then I pitched it. I pitched the entire, idea. This was 8 months out at that point, 8 months out from the September 2015 parking day, and I got all of them. They were all on board. So whatever you can do to pick these people, because you want them to be dependable and you want them to be able to fill the individual roles that they have on this team. So who is the team? So the first and formal person is that coordinator, that champion, that person that is going to just make sure this keeps on moving along. So you want somebody to be able to organize your design thoughts. And another thing I want to say right now is, if we have anybody on the call, or if we forward this to any other organizations that are not necessarily design organizations, we don't want everyone to feel that this is exclusive to only companies or firms or design groups of any kind that are capable of doing this stuff with specific tools. We want to be able to make everyone feel that they would be able to do this, whether with some colored pencils and some graph paper maybe. So but we do need somebody, some kind of drafter, some person who would lay this out to scale, and as the design process proceeds, somebody that can put this on the ground and kind of get estimates of how much hardscape material and how much plant material that you'll need to make this happen. So highly recommend a hard material coordinator, somebody who is responsible for reaching out to all the different sources of hardscape, identifying those sources, whether they are somewhere public or somewhere in someone's backyard, which is sometimes the case, or front yard, well, with their permission, of course, or coming from a particular vendor, a hardscape vendor that might have materials that they would not mind lending to a parklet, and in exchange potentially for some lead advertising. In the same way, you probably want to get a plant materials coordinator. These two people could be the same person. However, it's a fair amount of work to reach out to these sources. So back in 2015, it really helped to have these two people split out, because where your plants come from, they could come from the same place, but in some cases they're not necessarily. Plant materials can come from not only nurseries, but it can come from all kinds of organizations. Native plant societies, what have you. The plant materials coordinator would be responsible for finding those kind of locations. So the staging area steward is simply the person, whoops, let me back up. It's simply that person, once you've established your staging area, and I'll get into that in a future slide, they just make sure the plants don't die, things don't disappear, it's secure or locked up. Make sure everything's still there. Because you're going to be staging this stuff over time in the potentially months and especially weeks up to your parking day parklet. So you just want somebody, just make sure it's all there. And that could be that could be your coordinator. But in the case in 2015, it was very helpful to have a separate person that was just making sure everything stayed put and stayed alive. So highly and inventory. This person would help make sure that the inventory that we have is all still there, and they would be coordinating with the hard material and plant materials coordinator, make sure everything is still there. And this is optional, but pretty helpful. Somebody who would just, be in charge of finding rigs to move this stuff, whether they're flatbed trucks, or in this case, a very vintage 1960 something rig. Actually, maybe not 60s, maybe 70s. But anyway, somebody who could, finds different means of transporting this material, either lent or coming from somebody else outside of the team. Now, if the team has all these rigs already, then great, that's awesome. But that's not necessarily or even usually the case. So you might have to go out and God forbid, even maybe rent a U-Haul. But you're going to need it definitely for the whole day. So that may or may not work. Just depends on what your solution is. So hard materials can be anything. They could be more formal, they could be more permanent, they could be built, they could be pallets, they could be logs, whatever, bamboo, whatever you feel will fulfill your concept. The sky's the limit. There's no right or wrong thing to do this, as long as it's safe. And something I'll point out now too is also, if you put some kind of fencing along one edge, especially if the street that you're building on has high traffic volume and high speeds. Hopefully it doesn't have high speeds, but if it has high traffic volume, you're going to want to maybe identify some sources for fencing. Ideally, some kind of tasteful fencing. So I'm going to turn it over to Eden Bouchard for a little bit to talk about lends and donations.
Hi all, thanks for joining. Thank you, Chris. Just jumping in here to say that, you want to activate these spaces, and mostly you want to do that by seating. Usually people want to wander into your parklet. They might want to sit down and hang out for a little bit. So if you don't have access to hard materials, go right ahead and start early and contact some site furnishing organizations and companies. site furnishing companies, I think most of them would love to donate to an organization like yourselves at design firms alike to get their furniture out there for a day with high pedestrian volumes, seeing their products. It's a great marketing opportunity for them. And so I would say, mention these things when you're contacting them. I would go about it by doing a little local search for the San Diego area, site furnishing companies. If you're part of a design firm, you probably already have these contact reps in your address book. If not, a Google search will get you where you need. But I would just email them, top contact there, and let them know kind of how many you would like, how big your parklet is, and of course the day. Maybe organize a drop off and pick off of lending and donating. I would say that would be really helpful, and as well as plant material. If you want to move forward with plant material, you can, like Chris said, maybe contact some local plant nurseries and plant societies. And as we saw in previous examples, you could also build your seating. If it's more of an intricate design that you guys are doing, seating might be already incorporated into that. So you wouldn't have to worry about site furnishings. But again, I think that these all can be done if you just contact early and mention that great marketing opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eden. Much appreciated. So another element of our recommendation, recommendation number 4, is establish some kind of design process. And this could be high tech or low tech, depending on if you're a design firm or if you're not. If you're just a organization, get together with your team and, start sketching it out. Maybe hold a little charrette somewhere with a whiteboard and just start writing down themes and ideas. Just start the process. And this is really fun. This is kind of like getting together very informally and talking about what you'd like to see. And, if it's conflicting, that's great. But this is actually the whiteboard from the parklet that we did back in 2015. We were all students, graduate students and undergrads at the time, and we were putting together the process and just sketching a lot of ideas. And we came out with a very, very formal, three-part design to our concept. And we just, we kind of put it in a very graphical form that we pitched, kind of like we used these next graphics to kind of pitch this to, the organizations at the municipality. It doesn't have to be this neat or this clean, just to make that clear. However you want to communicate this to your host municipality or whoever you're trying to market this to, or even just conveying this to your volunteers, because your volunteers may want to understand what your overall concept is. But this is an opportunity to make it look good. So even your steps of your design process can be done graphically. And of course, a lot of design firms will be able to know how to do that. And that plan drafter that I mentioned before, just take that concept that was scribbled, either on a whiteboard or a napkin, and somehow plotting it out. In this case, it was done by CAD with some dimensions, but it doesn't have to be. You could do it, on graph paper with some idea of the dimensions of each of the parking spaces. Parking spaces tend to be 9 by 18 feet on average in the United States. So that's usually the dimensions. And so, but you want to go out there maybe and do a site visit and one of your team and just make sure what the exact dimensions are, and then you can start drafting it out. And this drafting will help be able to identify what kind of materials you want. So in this case, here is another concept kind of showing, for this particular theme that we did this, the human history of the built environment throughout the entirety of human history. So in the particular case of this, it was, fear of nature, control of nature, and harmony with nature. We were trying to make a statement, a very archetypal, very symbolic statement of the history of the built environment. So as students, we were really trying to be creative that way. So it began very much less formal and naturalistic, more formal in the middle, control of nature, and then more harmonious or more contemporary design at the very end. So it actually worked out pretty good. But you your design does not have to be something like this structured or this organized. It could be something that is more playful, more informal, however you want to do it. There is no right wrong way, as long as it's, you know, it's safe, and you know, the people of the municipality kind of buy into the idea. So at this level, you probably want to have something like this to show your municipality, the municipality, just kind of give them an idea of what to expect. You don't have to have it perfectly designed to the plant or to the brick, but you know, just have a conceptual idea, and this is a good place to be able to show it to the municipality. So that the plan drafter and your coordinators for hard and soft materials, soft being plant materials, then can start, you know, getting ideas of where the stuff's coming from, how much of it you're going to need. So with this level of planning, you're going to be able to make a much more substantial parklet. And so, like again, if you do want to do a more substantial one, this is definitely a good process to go. And having individual team members, like I was listing before, and a volunteer effort, a purely volunteer effort, is really helpful. So not any one person gets too weighed down with the amount of tasks needed in order to make this happen. So recommendation number 5, establish your staging areas. So basically, you want to find either a parking lot, somebody's rear yard, some place that has access to your entire team, but can be pretty secure. In the photos that you see in front of you, this is the rear of the College of Environment Design in Athens, Georgia, on the University of Georgia campus. It wasn't necessarily fenced in, but it was very secure because it's completely out of sight and no members of the public are ever going to be back here. So we felt our stuff was pretty secure. Not a high traffic area, so we felt pretty okay. And plus, it's immediately adjacent to the building. All the people in studio here can actually keep an eye on it during the course of the day. So, and we still have that staging area steward. That was a person just made sure everything was there, everything was watered that needed to be watered as we collected it. Because when you make all these connections with all these different suppliers of hardscape and plant materials, it's not going to all show up on the same day. It never is. And you definitely don't want it to show up on the day of the actual parklet. That will be a disaster and a nightmare. I highly recommend you don't. Have this stuff kind of arrive maybe in the weeks up to your parking day parklet. And because you might want to start prefabricating stuff, and this is not only a place to store stuff, but it's a place that you could prefabricate as much as possible, because fabricating it on the site of the parklet is difficult, especially if it's super early in the morning. Maybe there's cars. God forbid it's a place where there's a lot of rush hour. You're not going to feel very secure about putting this stuff together on site. So highly recommend prefabricating as much as possible. Here's just some more pictures of these are all people in my team that we had back in 2015, in addition to a couple other volunteers. Some of these hard materials were either lent to us or acquired from the reuse center. I don't know if there's any reuse centers in San Diego, but they are sources of recycled material that you might be able to use for this. And so in some cases, there might be furniture, outdoor furniture from your house, and you can reuse that or clean it up for your endeavor. This is kind of a fun picture. This is coming from the city of Dunedin in New Zealand, where we used an entire theater as our staging area. Well, actually, one of our staging areas. We had actually several staging areas for our large-scale event in New Zealand. And this particular staging area, we kept a lot of materials, including all these big paper balls. And our entire urban design team actually assembled all these in one evening, and it was a lot of fun. So, but it was secure, and we could keep them there. It was going to keep out of the weather. In this particular case, it was very important to keep them out of the weather before we actually installed them for the event. So recommendation number 6, identify potential partner organizations for volunteers. So be creative, think broadly, think of student groups, community organizations, and maybe within your own organization. But oftentimes people are too busy to be able to dedicate a lot of time. But these are people beyond your core team. These are people that can help fabricate items in the weeks prior to the actual parking day, as well as the actual day. And that's where you're going to need absolutely everybody, early in the morning, and then later that afternoon or evening to be able to set everything up and break everything down. And it is quite a volunteer endeavor. This was the year actually before, or a few years before the one I did in Athens, Georgia, but we had 50 volunteers actually for the one in 2015 for Athens, Georgia. So but that's an extreme of substantiality as far as of creating one of these things. This is actually a snapshot when we were setting up early that morning. This is actually kind of late morning. We got there, we arrived at 6:30 or 7 a.m. and started. It was pitch black, and we were able to put columns, or excuse me, cones down. Unfortunately, this car right here in the rear, you can see kind of in the back, was there all night long and in the morning. So we would have probably had our truck there, but instead we had to drop everything off in the street and block the street for a few minutes. But luckily we had tons of volunteers, and it was well organized, and we were able to identify lots of people to help in every step of the way up until it went live. We had it up and running at 9 a.m. So it is helpful for each team member to have their own 1 or 2 volunteers to help with their stuff. So each one of those team members that we were listing earlier, it would be really helpful for each one of those team members to maybe have 1 or 2 people to assist them in the things that they need done. Again, this is a volunteer effort, so it really does help to have help, not only in your team, and that's a given, but to have individual volunteers for each team member. But on the day of, call it game day, whatever you want to call it, on September 17th of this year, everybody's involved. So not only all the people that have been involved with each individual team member, but recruit more to help load, transport, drop off, set up, and break down and transport back at the end of the day. And let them be aware of their part of the day that they are involved. So, have a schedule, we had a Google sheet that was a mile long, but it had everybody's name on it, and the window that they would be helping with and what they would be doing. And it worked pretty flawlessly, to be honest. We had plenty of people. I was kind of surprised. Everybody showed up, and everything was taken down in record time, and very organized. And we had a place for each stuff to go. We had different, not only, they didn't necessarily go right back to the original staging area, sometimes it goes to new places. So it's an organizational effort. So in addition, recommendation number 7 is once you're planning this thing, whether it be your champion, organizer, or other people in the team, reach out to other organizations just to come and visit it. They don't necessarily even need to do anything, but they can, in the case here in Athens, Georgia, lots of classes showed up, about 7 different classes, and they brought the entire class to have class at our parklet, inside it or around it. So invite community organizations just to come experience it. If you have a really substantial parklet with a lot of impact in a high pedestrian area, it's going to get a lot of visitations anyway, a lot of unplanned visitations, which is exactly what you want. But bring more people to the party. It also shows those local businesses, if you have more public space in front of your business, you actually get more foot traffic. Here's just a couple more photos. This is another class on the right side. This is an undergraduate class in the case of 2015. The photo on the left was an impromptu modeling shoot that just decided, we didn't invite them, but they just came and they used it for a modeling shoot because it was a really beautiful spot. So the sky's the limit as far as what kind of organizations or groups you want to invite and experience it. Okay, so you made a parklet. Now what? How do you kind of build off this energy towards the future? It is a one day event. In some cases, if you really feel like you want to, you could get it permitted for more than one day, but we are really only sanctioning one day as far as being a parking day event. So, you know, you've taken this thing down. Now what? How can you make a lasting impact with this? So continue the conversation with the local stakeholders. So note any feedback received during the parking day event. In the case of 2015, it was pretty much 100% positive. We got a lot of great feedback. I think I mentioned it earlier, from the actual local police, as well as, you know, the people working for the city, and a lot of local, basically streetwalkers and Athens people that live there. Businesses, sometimes we got to talking to them. I kind of wish at that time we did a little bit more reaching out to them beforehand. That's why we feel that's really important that you reach out beforehand, just so they're warmed up to the idea. But notice the feedback that you received during the actual event. And yeah, like I mentioned, have those conversations with the local storefronts after the event. So maybe even have like some, not necessarily a formal interview, but maybe just, you know, stop by and talk to those business owners that were fronting the event and see how they felt about it. And it's also another opportunity to talk to them about, you know, how more public space in front of their business can result in much more business. And yeah, ask any feedback from local city officials about their impression about how it went. So this organization is called Urban Interventions, and they are a form of tactical urbanism. They organize more longer term urban interventions, literally. A lot of them are in the way of public art and placemaking installations. You know, sometimes in places that are underserved, with innovative, high impact, fast and low cost interventions. So if you got a lot of positive feedback from, you know, your parklet, your one-day parklet, this is an organization that could potentially help you extend that one location into the future, and they know how to. So definitely a good organization to contact, and they knew that we were presenting them during this presentation. So highly recommend you reach out to them and take this to the next step if you'd like. So definitely want to point out that this is not, this is a more unified countywide effort. The ASLA San Diego chapter will help promote your parklet. So oftentimes throughout the world, this country and the world, these are individual parklets organized by individual organizations, and they kind of live in a vacuum and not necessarily coordinated with each other. As far as I can tell, this is a pretty unique effort to make this county-wide. So we want as many of these things going as possible throughout the entire county. So we're going to promote this to more organizations, even past this webinar, to have these. And with all these parklets all over the county, we will help promote them. We will, you know, have a map or like a listing of all these different parklets all over the county and where their locations are, and maybe with little mini maps showing where the locations are, maybe like a Google map, who knows. But also a website that will kind of show where all these sites are, and we'll have an Instagram promoting this. And highly recommend you use these tags, mention ASLA_SD in all your posts, and use all these hashtags at a minimum to spread the word, because these will definitely show up on all these different hashtags that we're promoting on Instagram and other social media outlets. So you're not alone. We will help market your parklet and bring more people to come visit. And first of all, have fun. This was a lot of information, but this is meant to be first and foremost a fun thing. And so make sure that your coordinator wants to have fun doing this and your team wants to have fun doing this, because it's, you know, otherwise it can be a lot of labor, especially if you make a more substantial parklet. And this is a great opportunity to make more contacts and more friends, either, you know, in your local community or even in the people that you choose to be on your team and your volunteers. So one last thing is that if creating your own parklet ends up to being too daunting of a venture this year, you're very welcome to contribute to our chapter's submission. We highly recommend you doing your own. But you know, if for some whatever reason it just can't come to pass this year, but you got 6 months from now, so please please think it over and please plan early if you want to. But if you for some reason can't, our chapter is going to actually do our own parklet as well, and you can become part of that effort. And we'll have contact info for you at the end of this presentation. So again, to reiterate, Parking Day, it's a Friday. It's always a Friday, third Friday of every year. This year, it's September 17th, 2021. Please put it on your calendars. And it's an all-day event from early morning to late afternoon into the evening. Usually it's during the daylight hours, but if you want to go longer, that's up to you and your team, and when you want to break it down. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. At this point, we're going to take questions and have an open dialogue. We can take questions that have been posed on the chat, or just keep it open, and you're welcome to unmute yourselves if you want.
So, Chris, this is Tracy. Colleen Fitzsimmons with the San Diego Green Building Council wants to know whether you have construction plans for the wooden bench you showed in the staging area.
Yeah, oh gosh, where did that come from? Probably not. That was several years ago. I'd probably have better luck with the seating that we made in Dunedin, New Zealand. We actually had a local organization build those for us, and they were a nonprofit in New Zealand of a lot of people that do that kind of stuff. They like to, they're handy, so they actually built it for us, and they did it for a much more lower rate. So no, I don't. Not handily, but I could probably track down the one for New Zealand. I could send that your way. But those were very substantial furniture that were made out of pallets. The ones from Athens, yeah, you're gonna have to maybe do a little research and maybe find some simple plans.
So I'm going to put everybody on the screen so that if people do have a question, just raise your hand and unmute. And let me just put everybody up here. Wow, look at that. Get rid of the screen. And you don't want to see my screen. Sorry. And, well, I'll get rid of mine. Anyway, kids, go ahead and, there we go. Good. So, Chris, for what I am doing right now, I'm recording this. So I'll basically send this around to anybody who has an interest in sharing it with their firms, and let us know whether you might want to move forward on this to do one of your own. Anybody have any other questions? Everybody's so shy.
If you're shy, go ahead and just throw it in the chat. Otherwise, definitely reach out to us. We're going to send around this presentation, so you'll have it to refer to, and you will also have our contact information to follow up with any questions that you might have.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. This was great.
Yes, and spread it out far and wide too. Even if for some reason you know some people that would be really interested in this kind of endeavor, but they weren't able to make it tonight, please, you know, we'll have the recording of this entire webinar as well as the presentation that we could send around.
Okay.
Thanks again to all the presenters. Thanks for Tracy for hosting it, and thanks again for absolutely all our attendees. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. We're really looking forward to meeting you in person and visiting your parklet.
Yeah,